I used to think the cruelest thing in this world was losing someone you love, but I was wrong. The real cruelty is watching your own child push you into a dark corner, stand there frozen like a statue, while his wife slaps you across the face in front of more than 100 guests, and then coldly demands the keys to the house you spent half your life scraping and saving to build. That slap cracked loud sharp hit the wedding floor like somebody shattered something sacred. I stood there, my left cheek burning, my heart feeling like somebody reached inside and stole a piece of it. But Malik, the boy I raised on late night shifts, single mother meals, and stolen hours of sleep, he just watched. No question, no touch, not even a flicker of apology in his eyes. And right then I understood family can be where you rise, but it can also be the place that drags you the deepest down. What they didn't know was that I had been seeing everything long before that night. And in that exact moment, the moment they thought I was at my weakest, I decided to stand up and change the entire course of my life. I never thought my whole life would get torn apart right in the middle of what was supposed to be my son's happiest day. But that afternoon, while the live band was playing loud, glasses clinked everywhere, and warm golden lights poured over every table like honey, I just stood there, frozen like a statue, while the world around me spun in a way my heart was never ready for. Malik's wedding, my one and only son, was held in a big community hall on the west side of the city. A beautiful place, wide open space, high ceilings, strings of lights everywhere, champagne-colored tablecloths, and big bunches of white lilies sitting like soft clouds. I remember taking a deep breath as I walked in, letting that sweet scent settle in my chest, hoping it would calm the worries that had been sitting heavy on me for months. I wanted to believe today was the day I would actually see my boy happy. I really tried to believe that. The hall was already full. Malik's side of the family, his daddy's folks, and a few cousins from Mississippi were chatting and laughing. Jamila's family, though, they came in loud, polished, successful, carrying this kind of energy that filled the whole room like they owned the place. I stood quietly along the left wall, clutching my little purse, waiting, hoping to catch Malik's eyes. Just one look. Just something to tell me he remembered I was here, that even with everything changing, I was still his mama. But Malik stayed busy taking photos with his in-laws. He smiled wide, held onto his father-in-law's shoulder, bowed his head toward the camera. And Jamila, beautiful, confident, shining like the whole place was her stage, stood right beside him. I didn't blame them. It was their big day. I've been stepping back all my life so my son could shine. But that didn't stop that tiny sting, the kind every mama knows. When you realize the child you once held close now belongs to another world. I looked around, trying to find somebody familiar to talk to, but everybody was busy, or maybe just busy pretending I wasn't there. Others glanced my way and didn't bother saying a word, like I was some extra guest who didn't matter. I'd gotten used to that the whole past year while Malik and Jamila planned this wedding. But today, it cut a little sharper. Still, I stood there, quiet, smiling. But what happened next? I couldn't handle. I heard fast footsteps behind me. And before I could even turn around, smack! A sharp, stinging sound cracked through the hall like somebody slapped the music right out the air. My cheek burned, heat spreading fast like fire catching dry leaves. It took me half a second to realize I had just been slapped. Me, a 62-year-old woman, a mama who raised her child alone, working her fingers raw. I got hit, right there, in the middle of my own son's wedding. Jamila stood in front of me, breathing hard like she finally let out whatever anger she'd been holding in. Her face twisted, eyes cold, lips trembling with rage. But what shocked me wasn't the slap. It was that little flicker of satisfaction in her eyes, like she truly believed she had the right to do it. "You go and hand over the keys to your apartment," Jamila said, voice sharp like steel. "Right now. You don't need it anymore." My legs went numb. The room didn't go quiet, but it felt quiet. I knew music was still playing. People were still standing around. But all I could hear was my own heartbeat thudding slow and heavy, hurting with every beat. I swallowed, steadying myself. "Jamila, What are you talking about? She stepped closer, so close I could smell the champagne on her breath. Don't play dumb, she said, voice low but heavy. We know you still got the keys. Malik and I need that apartment. You live by yourself. You don't need all that space. Hand them over. I looked around for Malik, waiting for him to step in, hold his wife back, protect his mama, or at least look confused or ashamed or something. But Malik stood just a few steps away, pale, stiff, lips pressed tight like stone. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't ask his wife what she was doing. He just watched me like I was a burden, watched like seeing his mama slapped in front of everybody was. My chest caved in. Not from the slap, but from realizing just how far gone my son was. When had I lost him? Since when did he think staying silent while his mother was humiliated was okay? I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough to know I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't give these people the pleasure. I wouldn't cry in front of someone who hit me for greed and pride. I touched my cheek not for the pain, but to anchor myself, to remind myself I was still here, still whole, still me. Something inside me shifted. Not sadness, not anger. Something colder, clearer, like the sound of glass breaking. Not loud, but sharp enough to cut straight through. I looked at Jamila, then at Malik, and I knew. Every illusion, every fragile hope, everything I held on to ended right there. Not because of the slap, but because my son said nothing. I took a slow breath, reached into my purse. My hand didn't shake. Every movement was smooth, steady, deliberate. I pulled out my phone, dialed a number. When the other end picked up, I only said 3 words: Carlos, go ahead. If I had to trace this whole tragedy back to where it truly began, I know for a fact it started on that spring afternoon 2.5 years ago when Malik brought Jamila to my house for the very first time. Back then, I had no idea that the moment I opened my door to welcome that young woman was also the moment something fragile in my family started to crack. That day was sunny, the kind of warm, glittering April sunlight you only get on the west side of the city. The light filtered through the leaves out front and spilled into my old living room, laying down soft, honey-colored patches across the wooden floor. I woke up earlier than usual, wiped down the oak table I inherited from my mama when she passed, and laid a fresh olive green cloth over it to make the place feel a little more welcoming. I even made a small pot of gumbo, Malik's favorite since he was little, 'cause he'd told me, "Mom, I want you to meet someone special today." Just that one sentence had my heart beating faster. When you're a mama with only one son, every time he says he met someone special, you can't help but get nervous. Not nervous he'll leave you, but nervous in that quiet, hopeful way, wishing he'll find the happiness you yourself never got to have whole. I stood in the kitchen mirror, adjusting my natural curls and putting on a bit of berry-colored lipstick. I'm not a fancy woman, but I wanted to look put together. For a moment, I caught sight of myself, a black woman well into her 60s, wrinkles around my eyes, but still carrying that stubborn strength that's hard to miss. And I smiled. I wanted Malik to see I was okay, still standing, still the steady place he could always return to. When the knock came at the door, I lost one breath. I wiped my hands on my apron and went to answer it. Malik stood there, tall, bright, glowing like light was coming off him. Beside him was Jamila, my first time seeing her. She had a soft smile, but it was short, the sort of polite smile young folks give elders without really meaning it. She wore a fitted cream dress, her hair straight and silky down her shoulders, and she smelled like one of those expensive perfumes from the downtown boutiques. I caught that hint of sweetness and coolness the second they walked in. Nothing like the scents the women in my neighborhood would ever wear. "Hi, ma'am," Jamila said, voice sweet, but "Malik told me a lot about you. That should have made me happy." But the way her eyes drifted over my home made my smile stiffen just a little. She looked at my old bookshelf, The family photo, the lamp Malik used when he was in elementary school, everything. Like she was evaluating it. Her smile stayed on her lips, but it wasn't the kind a person gives when they feel at ease. And something in my stomach tightened, just a little, like that quiet mother's intuition tugging on my sleeve. But I pushed it aside right away. I always told myself never to let my own bias get in the way of Malik's happiness. I led them to the living room. Jamila sat on the couch, crossing her legs in this elegant but distant way. Malik sat beside her, arms stretched out over the back of the sofa, half showing her off to the world, half reminding her this was his childhood home. I found it sweet. I wanted to believe he truly loved her. I brought out the gumbo and served each of them a bowl. Jamila stared at it a second longer than most people would. Not rudely, but like someone unfamiliar with the strong flavors of Southern food, or questioning if she ought to eat it. "It smells wonderful," she said, though I could hear the little hitch in her voice. Malik, though, he ate like he always had, happily, and that warmed me. I always believed little moments like that could stitch back the threads between a mama and her child. We talked about work, Jamila's family, their plans. She told me about her parents, business owners with a big house in the suburbs, folks who traveled several times a year. Malik looked at her with this dreamy expression every time she spoke. I listened, trying to keep my heart wide open. But the more we talked, the more I noticed that Jamila seemed to look at the world from way up high, from a place folks like me rarely got to stand. Everything she said was gentle, but carried that faint tone of someone used to giving orders, not sharing life. At one point, she asked, "Have you lived here long, ma'am?" "I've been here over 30 years," I said, "since Malik was just a tiny thing." "Oh, that long." She glanced around again. A home with that many memories must be hard to move out of. I paused, not fully sure why she mentioned moving at all, but she just smiled, like it was harmless small talk. When they left, Jamila gave me a hug, but it was light, polite, barely a touch. Malik kissed my cheek, and in that brief moment, I saw my little boy again. The one who used to run to the playground every afternoon. The one who cried when I got sick. The one who said, "Mama, you're my favorite person in the world." I stood at the door, watching them get into the car. As it pulled away, I suddenly felt older, years older. Not because Jamila had been rude, she hadn't done anything openly wrong. But something in those soft little comments, those measuring eyes, the way she carried herself in my space, something told me a small distance had started forming. Not big yet, but real. When I went back inside, the smell of gumbo still lingered in the kitchen. I sat down in my old chair, looked out at the room under the warm lamplight, and a quiet sadness floated up inside me. I told myself it was just nerves, just me overthinking because I'd lived alone too long, just fear of losing my boy. But deep inside, in a still, tiny corner of my heart, today wasn't just the day Malik brought his girlfriend home. Today was the day I started standing on the outside edge of my own son's life. I can't point to the exact moment when things shifted from a little uncomfortable to something ain't right. It wasn't some big event, not a fight, not one disrespectful incident. It was more like when a room has a strange smell, you don't notice it at first. But the longer you sit there, the more it bothers you. Little by little, I started feeling a new kind of energy in my own house. Something that wasn't mine. Something that pushed me back, one tiny step at a time. After that first visit, Malik and Jamila came by more often. It should have made me happy. But every time they walked in, I felt like an outsider, watching my own son's life pass me by. Jamila began talking more, suggesting more, and strangely, Malik began talking less. He just looked at her, waiting. Like every thought she had was gospel. One afternoon, Jamila sat down right in the center of my living room like it was her regular spot. She kicked off her heels lightly, crossed her legs, and glanced around the room. "Aubrey." Somehow she'd switched to calling me by my first name, and I couldn't even remember when. "Your house feels kinda tight, doesn't it? You live alone." Do you really need this much space? I froze. Not because of the question, but because of how casual she said it. This wasn't the kind of thing a girl who barely knew me should ask. I kept my voice gentle. I'm used to it, baby. I've been here most of my life. And I love this house. Jamila smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I get that. But there are better, more convenient options, like the apartment in Midtown we've been looking at. It's near work, near the gym, real nice area. If you moved somewhere smaller, it'd be easier to manage and cheaper. Don't you think so? I had no idea how to answer. How was I supposed to say I didn't want to move? That this house wasn't just a building, it was where my whole life lived. Where Malik's laughter once bounced off the walls, where he and I ate dinner alone for years, growing up together in our own way, that every scratch on the floor held a memory. But I swallowed it all and forced a polite smile. I didn't want to start anything. What troubled me more wasn't Jamila, it was Malik. He sat there with his arm around her shoulder, nodding along, adding little phrases like, "Yeah, Ma, a smaller place really would be easier for you. Big houses cost a lot in utilities. We can take care of you." I felt suffocated. None of what he said was outright wrong, but the strange part was this. Malik never talked like that before. He used to ask me how I felt before he spoke for me. He used to tilt his head and meet me with that soft respect. But the Malik in front of me now, he was harder, more practical, almost like he was repeating something someone else taught him. A week later, Jamila's family invited me for dinner at their house. I brought my famous peach cobbler, my pride of the neighborhood, hoping it'd be a warm gesture. But the second I stepped into their big, shiny home, Jamila's mother, Lorraine, shook my hand politely, but coldly. She looked at the cobbler like it was something outdated, unnecessary. "Oh, thank you," she said, like she meant, "I didn't ask for this." The dinner table looked like something from a magazine. White linen, scented candles, crystal glasses. The food was plated like artwork too fancy for my taste. I tried to keep up with the conversation, but they talked mostly about travel, business deals, and financial strategies. In the middle of dinner, Lorraine suddenly asked, "Aubrey, living alone must get lonely for someone your age, right? Older folks get sad easily. There are some really nice senior living communities nearby. Maybe you should consider one." I set my fork down. Malik looked up mid-bite, but instead of defending me, he just frowned slightly and stayed quiet. That heavy kind of silence, the type that agrees without saying a word. I forced a smile. "I'm doing fine. I'm still healthy. I take care of myself just fine." "Well, it's still good to plan ahead," Lorraine replied. "They have 24/7 care. It'd give the kids peace of mind knowing you're looked after." The kids? The way that word stuck in my chest. Being alone never scared me. But the idea that folks were quietly plotting to tuck me away somewhere convenient for them, that made my skin prickle. Then one day, Malik told me, "Ma, we're trying to buy the apartment, but we're a little short. If you could help cover part of it, we'll pay you back a bit at a time." "Not much," I asked. "How much?" He dodged the question. Jamila sat right beside him, her hand gliding up and down his back like she was reminding him of his lines. "If you sell the house or refinance it, that'd be enough," Jamila said, voice smooth as honey but cold as ice. "You won't have to worry about anything." I realized those red flags were no longer whispers. They had shape and weight and hands that were reaching for me. Malik wasn't looking at me with the eyes of a son in need. He looked at me like someone trying to persuade or acquire something. That night, I sat in my living room, lamplight glowing over the old picture of us Malik at 8 years old, smiling wide, chocolate ice cream smeared all over his mouth. I traced his little face with my fingertip. I whispered, "Where'd you go, baby? Who took my son and replaced him with that cold man?" I didn't know the answer. But deep inside, from a quiet place in my chest, I could hear danger. A danger wrapped in sweet words, helpful suggestions, polite smiles, and harmless looks. And I understood something clearly. If I didn't stay sharp, I wouldn't just lose my house, I'd lose myself. There are some truths that, once you see them, you can't unsee. They're like a bright flashlight shining into a room you always believed was tidy. And when that light flips on, you suddenly notice every layer of dust, every cobweb, every trace you used to convince yourself was nothing. For me, that moment, the light switch moment, was when I opened the first envelope from Joseph, the man who'd been helping me manage my finances for over 10 years. The sky was gray that day, clouds thick, the light in my living room turning everything a pale, tired silver. I sat at the kitchen table, my tea long gone, cold. Joseph laid his black briefcase in front of me, his eyes full of sympathy. "I wasn't ready to accept Aubrey," he said quietly. "You sure you want to see this?" I nodded. Heavy, like the motion cost me something. I opened the folder, and from the very first second, I knew I wasn't prepared. On the first page was a summary of every financial help I'd given Malik over the past 3 years. The numbers hit me in stark black and white. $1,500 to cover his credit card debt, $2,200 for overdue rent, $4,500 in monthly transfers to help stabilize their living costs, $8,700 for Jamila's medical bills I never knew existed, $12,000 for wedding deposit fees, and dozens of little expenses I didn't bother remembering back then because all I thought was, it's just helping my child a little. At the bottom was a total that made my hand tremble. $162,000. $162,000 in 3 years. I'd lived frugally all my life. A single black woman, a nurse for more than 20 years, saving every dime. I'd never had abundance, but I never lacked either. I always thought I had a grip on life, but that number sat there like a witness on the stand, exposing how badly I'd been taken advantage of without even knowing it. I don't know how long I stayed silent. I only remember my chest tightening, as if someone had been squeezing my heart for months and I'd only just noticed. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was the thought that my own son, the child I held through sleepless nights, the one I fed, clothed, and loved with the softest part of my heart, had stood by while someone turned his mama into an interest-free bank. Joseph didn't say a word. He placed his hand gently over mine, soft, respectful, but I pulled back, not because of him, but because I knew if anyone touched me just then, I'd break. I didn't know it was that much, I whispered, my voice rough. Joseph nodded. You've been generous, but they weren't honest with you. A lot of these weren't emergencies like they claimed. I lifted my head. What do you mean? He pulled out a stack of Malik's bank statements, statements I never knew existed. The transactions punched me in the gut. Designer shoes, luxury restaurant reservations, a Miami vacation package, jewelry, all charged during the same months they called me late at night crying, "Mom, the rent's late. We're in trouble. Please help us one last time." My heart didn't shatter with a bang. It cracked quietly, cold, clean, like glass breaking under pressure. I leaned back in my chair, head tipped toward the ceiling, staring up like I was searching for something left untouched. But the truth wasn't done yet. Joseph slid another folder toward me. The label read, Refinance Inquiry and Co-Ownership Request. I opened it. Each line hit me like a blunt object. Malik had visited the bank 3 times, asking about using my home as collateral for their apartment loan. He'd told the staff I planned to transfer ownership to my only son. He'd asked about being added as a co-owner with me. And the worst, a note written by a loan officer. Client says, mother is elderly and easy to persuade. I set the papers down, my hands shaking, not with anger, but with the realization that someone had been draining me slowly, months on end, and I hadn't felt the knife. Joseph hesitated, then said, There's something else you need to know. That's when Carlos walked in. He carried another stack recordings, text messages, emails he obtained legally while investigating elder coercion. In one recording, I heard Jamila's voice sharp, cold. If she don't sell the house, then say she's getting forgetful, okay? Old people do that. She's gonna end up in a home anyway. I froze. I couldn't breathe for several seconds. Never in my life did I think I'd hear the woman my son planned to marry talk about me like I was an old piece of furniture, something worn out, ready to be replaced for convenience. Carlos opened another email. We need to speed up the process of getting the house in his name. She's weak. Malik just has to say the right things. I don't remember exactly how I reacted. It all moved through a hazy, muffled fog. I only remember feeling something tender inside me being ripped out and replaced with a cold stone. The house was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking. I looked out the window, trees swaying gently in the yard, the last peaceful thing left untouched in my world. After a long moment, I spoke. Soft, but sure. They planned all this, while I was right there. Carlos sat up straighter. Aubrey, now you know everything, and you have the power to protect yourself. I reached over and touched the picture of Malik on the shelf. 8 years old, smiling big, chocolate ice cream on his cheek. I wanted to hold that boy again, but that boy was gone. In his place was a man willing to talk about putting his mama in a nursing home just to smooth out his financial future. In that moment, for the first time in months, I felt fire rise inside me. Not anger, awakening. A fire lit when a mother finally sees that if she doesn't stand up for herself, nobody else will. I tightened my fist, took a deep breath, and said, I've seen enough. That night, after Joseph and Carlos put all those documents in my hands, I sat alone in my living room for a long, long time. No lights on, no TV, just the street lamp outside spilling a thin stripe of yellow through the little window, enough for me to see my shadow stretched long across the wooden floor. And in that darkness, I replayed every word from those recordings. Jamila's ice-cold voice, Malik's weak little murmurs of agreement, his mother calling shots like I was nothing but debris in their way. Those words ran through my mind like acid, eating through every good memory I once tried so hard to protect. I sat still like that for almost an hour. No crying, no anger. The pain wasn't sharp anymore. It had settled into something low and smoldering, like hot embers under a blanket of ash. And it was those embers, not the flames, that pushed me to stand up. I turned on the kitchen light, poured myself a glass of cold water. When the room lit up, I saw everything clearer. All the old pictures of Malik as a baby, his little pair of worn-out shoes still by the door, the knife marks he carved into the table when he was 8, things that used to soften my heart. But now they only reminded me how long I'd been putting my trust in the wrong places. The next morning, I called Joseph and Carlos over. Not because I felt ready, but because I understood this. If I didn't act now, I'd sink deeper into that same spiral that drained me for 3 whole years. Carlos laid down another stack of papers, legal documents, to end every bit of financial support and authorization I'd ever given Malik and Jamila. Each page stamped, marked, lined with clauses that left nothing unclear. Aubrey, Carlos said, calm as ever, before you sign, I need you to understand, starting this moment, every financial tie with them is cut. They won't be able to sign for you, can't use your information, can't touch this house for a loan ever again. I turned the pages slowly. Each sentence felt like a blade cutting one invisible rope after another ropes I didn't even realize I'd let them tie around me. But there was no pain, just relief. Relief, like slipping off a heavy backpack I didn't know I'd been carrying. Sign it, Aubrey, Joseph said softly. You've carried enough. I picked up the pen. My hand was so steady it surprised even me. No shaking, no hesitation. I signed the first page, the black ink spreading across the paper like a decision that couldn't be taken back. Then the second, then the third, all the way to the last. With each signature, I pulled myself one step farther out of the pit. Then Carlos handed me another stack, this time for revising my will. I looked at him, eyebrows lifting. I think you should do this while your mind is clear, he said, so no one can ever take advantage of you again. I opened my old will. Almost everything was left to Malik, because I truly thought he was all I had. But reading it now, all I saw was a heartbreakingly naive version of myself. A woman trusting a child who no longer existed. Carlos handed me a new draft. Most of my assets would go into a fund to support elderly people suffering financial abuse from family. The rest, smaller, would go into my personal savings and a small education fund in case Malik ever had children. I asked quietly, "Is this cruel?" Carlos shook his head, gentle but firm. "Protecting yourself is never cruel." I looked at the old will one last time. Malik's little face came into my mind, the way he used to laugh, his tiny feet pounding across the yard, his arms wrapped around my neck. Then I remembered the grown Malik, the man who sat silent while his wife disrespected me, the man willing to consider putting me in a nursing home because it was convenient for their money plans. Those two images didn't fit together anymore. I set the old will aside, picked up the pen, and signed the new one. That afternoon, I went to the bank. The branch manager, a middle-aged Latina woman, recognized me right away. When I handed her the papers requesting Malik's access to every account under my name be revoked, she looked at me for a long moment, then said softly, "You're doing the right thing. A lot of seniors walk in here in much worse shape." I just nodded, feeling both heavy and light at the same time. After the bank, I went home. When I opened the door, the house was exactly the same, quiet, warm in its own way. Still, the little nest I built all by myself. But I wasn't the same. This house wasn't a place I feared losing anymore. It was mine again, fully, safely, wholly. I made a fresh cup of tea, set it down on the table, and spread all the documents out one more time. Not because I doubted my choices, but because I wanted to remember this feeling of taking my life back after letting somebody else steer it for far too long. As I sat there, the late afternoon sun slid across the room, warm gold washing over my hands. I saw every wrinkle, every little scar, every raised vein marks from a lifetime of working, caring, raising, enduring, loving. And right then, I knew for sure I will never let anyone, not even my own son, treat my sacrifices like obligations. I gathered the papers, tucked them neatly into my folder. Tomorrow, Carlos would file everything, officially severing every financial tie between me and Malik's marriage. A chapter closed, not loud, not tearful, just a quiet, final click of a door shutting. Late that night, I stood in front of the mirror, looking at myself for a long moment. My eyes were a little red, but not from crying, from relief, like I'd finally swum out of cold, deep water I didn't realize I'd been drowning in. I turned off the light, went back to the living room, and sat in my old wooden chair. For the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again. 6 months after the night I signed those papers, cutting off every financial tie to Malik and Jamila, my life shifted onto a completely different path. I won't say it was easy, nothing involving your only child ever is, but it was a path of clarity. A clarity that hurt, yes, but one that saved me from the darkness I'd been wandering in for years. During those 6 months, I hardly saw Malik at all. He texted a few times, but not to ask if I was okay. He wanted to know about documents, asked, "Why would you do this?" Mom asked, "Why you being so difficult?" And a few times he hinted that Jamila was upset, that they were struggling because of my stubborn decisions. I answered simply that everything I signed had a reason, that I was fine, and that when he wanted to talk honestly, as a grown man, I would be ready. But Malik never called, never came by, never apologized. I still have all those messages. Sometimes I reread them, not to hurt myself, but to remind my heart that sometimes you gotta stare the truth in the face before you finally stop feeding the fantasy that keeps cutting you. Then one early fall evening, Carlos called me. His voice carried something mixed between encouragement and caution. "Aubrey, the show Stories of a Lifetime wants to invite you. They heard about your case from the elder abuse organization. They want you to share your story." I went quiet. I've never been the type to stand in front of cameras. All my life, I stayed backstage, caring for patients, caring for my child, caring for day to day life. I never imagined a day I'd be asked to speak my own story to millions. But then I thought of the other mothers, the grandmothers, those with no Josephs, no Carloses beside them, those being pushed into the shadows under a twisted idea of family duty. I thought of how close I came to being one of them. So I said, okay, I'll do it. On filming day, I picked a warm brown jacket, the color I always felt safest in. The studio surprised me. Bright, but not harsh. Soft lights. Deep green velvet sofas. Warmer than I expected. The host, a black woman in her 50s named Marlene, walked straight up and hugged me. A real hug, not one of those polite ones. It softened something in my chest. You don't have to share anything you're not comfortable with, Marlene said, but your story might save somebody. I inhaled slowly. When the cameras rolled, I started from the small things. The house I'd lived in more than 30 years. The son I raised with my whole life. The day I first met Jamila with her polite but distant smile. I talked slowly, evenly. No sugarcoating, no dramatizing, just the truth of what I lived. Then I told them about the late night calls, the emergency money, the promises of, we'll pay you back. I talked about the nights I sat in my living room, chest aching but still forcing myself to say, okay, baby, mama will help. I talked about the dinner at Lorraine's house, the judging eyes, the question about nursing homes, and the moment Malik sat silent like that was the most reasonable question in the world. I talked about the day all those numbers hit me, $162,000 in 3 years. I told them about the recording where Jamila said I was easy to persuade, like I was some door she could pop open with a shove. My voice caught right there, not because I wanted to cry, but because something heavy lodged itself in my throat. Marlene placed her hand over mine. Her eyes didn't push, just let me know I could continue whenever I was ready. So I did. I told them about the day I signed everything, about that strange light but aching feeling. I told them about the loneliness of those 6 months after Malik disappeared from my life, like I was the one who betrayed him. I talked about emotional betrayal, the kind of wound elders carry quietly, unseen. The room went silent. Then Marlene asked, Aubrey, if Malik is watching right now, what would you want to say to your son? I took a long breath. I thought of the little boy I once held against my heart every night, the teenager who cried when he lost his scholarship, the man who watched his wife slap me at their wedding and said nothing. I gathered all of those images inside me. I'd tell him that I still love you, I said slowly, but I love myself too. And I spent too many years forgetting that a single tear fell not from sadness, but from finally speaking the truth I'd feared the most. Marlene squeezed my hand. When the cameras stopped, the whole crew hugged me and thanked me. I left the studio into a cool October evening, a soft breeze brushing my shoulders. And for the first time in years, I felt a real peace, not because everything was fixed, but because I had finally told the story I'd buried so long just to avoid hurting anyone. Driving home, I turned on the radio. An old Aretha Franklin soul track came on. That sound wrapped around me like a message. I wasn't the woman who kept shrinking back anymore. I had stepped into the light, using my own voice. And the strange thing was, deep inside, I felt like this was only the beginning. Because after that TV appearance, I started getting messages, letters, phone calls, story after story from people just like me, elders, parents, folks being drained by the very family they raised. I read every line, every word, and I knew something bigger was waiting for me. 6 months after the night my son's wife slapped me at his wedding, I knew I wasn't walking alone anymore. And I also knew something was coming, something that would change everything, something Malik and Jamila would never see coming. 3 days after the taping of that TV show, I came home to the familiar quiet of my apartment. A different kind of quiet this time, not the emptiness I used to drown in, but the kind that settles after a storm. The trees still wet, the sky still gray with ash, but the air clean in a way I hadn't felt in years. I thought I'd have a long stretch of silence to recover from everything I'd lived through, but life don't ever move the way you think it will. On the third morning, I heard a knock. When I opened the door, it was Lucy, my young downstairs neighbor, the girl who used to bring me soup when I was sick. Her face was pale. "Aubrey, did you see the news?" "No." "What happened?" She held her phone up. On the screen was a local news page. Leaked wedding video. Bride slaps MOTHERINLAW in front of 130 guests. And right under it was a frozen frame of me, my body, jolting back from Jamila's slap. My face stunned in a way no one deserves to be seen. My heart dropped straight into my stomach. "Oh my God," I whispered. What surprised me most was that I didn't feel embarrassed the way I once feared I would. I felt cold. Cold like I'd fallen straight into a river of ice water. No warning, no breath. Lucy grabbed my hand. "Aubrey, don't look at the comments. Really, don't. But I know people, and I know that if I didn't read them, my mind would imagine worse." I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and found the video. 25 seconds long, short enough to go viral, easy enough to replay over and over, and painful enough to choke me, even though I thought I'd grown past this pain. The slap cracked through the speakers, gasps from the guests. Then Jamila's voice sharp, cold, shameless. "Give me the keys to your house. You don't need it anymore." And Malik, standing just a few steps away, saying nothing. Just that silence. But on video, silence hits harder than any blade. I scrolled to the comments. Hundreds of them, older folks, younger folks, black, white, Latin, Asian, everybody furious on my behalf. They called Jamila cruel. They asked if Malik had any humanity left. They shared stories of their own families. Some said they cried watching it, that they'd never seen anyone humiliated like that at their own child's wedding. I blinked a few times, not to hold back tears, but to steady my mind, because I knew, once truth hits daylight, anything might follow. And just like I expected, 3 hours later, Jamila called. I didn't want to answer, but I picked up. I'd run long enough time to stop running. Her voice came through the speaker, shaking, not from remorse, but from fear. "What did you do? Why'd you let that video spread? We're getting attacked, dragged everywhere. You trying to ruin our lives?" I closed my eyes. "I didn't post that video. Don't lie," she screamed. "You did it and now you want to act innocent? What kind of mother-in-law are you?" Her voice scraped my ear like metal on metal. I kept mine steady. I didn't record it. I didn't share it. I didn't post it. If someone out of the 130 guests uploaded it, that ain't on me. She went quiet for a second. Then she broke down. Not the cry of somebody sorry. The cry of somebody watching their privileges crumble. "You have to fix this. You have to say something. People at my job want to suspend me. Malik can't sleep. Please, please do something." And for the first time since I met Jamila, her voice sounded truly weak. But weak don't mean sorry. I only said, "I hope y'all understand who caused what happened that day." I hung up before she could say another word. The next 3 days, that video popped up everywhere, from tiny personal accounts to big social analysis channels. Senior advocacy groups reached out. A few lawyers offered pro bono help. Elders wrote letters telling me how their own kids controlled their money or pushed them aside to take their homes. I read every letter, every story, and I realized this battle I fought wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. On the 5th day, Malik texted me a long, messy message about losing his job temporarily because of the backlash, about Jamila being scared to leave the house. Not a single apology, not one word of accountability, just one line that made me pause longer than the rest. "Mom, why are you taking strangers' side instead of mine?" I stared at that line for a long time. Then I closed the screen, turned off my phone, because the truth is, I had taken his side his whole life. And that's exactly how I almost lost myself. Now, for the first time, I was standing on my own side. And let me tell you, it didn't feel bad at all. 6 months after that video went viral, I received an invitation to speak at a major conference for organizations fighting elder financial abuse. They wanted me to share my story on stage in front of thousands of people who'd been exploited, drained, manipulated by their own children, relatives, loved ones. I placed my hand on the envelope and breathed slow. I didn't know if I could stand on that stage without shaking. I didn't know if Malik would ever forgive me, or more importantly, if I even wanted him to. But I knew one thing clearer than anything else. I survived something many people never get through alone. And if my story could help even one person feel less alone, then maybe everything I went through had a purpose after all. I folded the letter and set it in the drawer by the window. Outside, sunlight poured onto the patio tiles like melted honey. And for the first time in a very, very long while, I felt something real settle inside me. Peace. Not because the world was gentler, but because I'd finally learned how to stand steady in it. 2 years have passed since the moment I got slapped in the middle of my own son's wedding. 2 years since every truth I'd been avoiding, every polished surface, every shadow I pretended not to see was stripped bare. And the strange thing is, if someone had told me back then that I would find peace again, maybe even build a new life from that rubble, I would have laughed. A bitter, tired laugh. But time, if you know when to stand up, has a way of healing in its own language. After appearing on Stories of a Lifetime, after the explosion caused by that leaked wedding video, I suddenly became someone people looked to for comfort, for courage, for guidance. I never imagined a 62-year-old black woman like me, someone who'd spent her life juggling hospital shifts, bills, and lonely dinners, would become a voice for hundreds, even thousands. But life sometimes builds a road right under your feet, whether you planned it or not. I remember the day I got a letter from Miss Evelyn, a 74-year-old widow from Alabama. Handwritten, each word trembling a little. I saw myself in your story. My daughter has controlled all my finances for 12 years. Now she's trying to sell my house. I've been so afraid. But when you said, loving yourself is also a choice, thank you for being brave enough to save women like me. I read that letter on my sofa while the late afternoon sun spilled across the living room, tinting the page gold. Cars hummed outside. Kids yelled at the playground nearby. Life kept moving in its quiet, stubborn rhythm. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. My story no longer belonged only to me. It had become something bigger, a reminder that respect is not a privilege, and elders are not doors people can push open just because it's convenient. With help from a few organizations, I started building a small fund in my name. It began with just a few $1,000s money from my retirement and part of my savings. But then, strangers began sending more. Some gave $50. Some gave 5. Some sent notes. My mama went through the same. My grandma died before she could tell her story. And slowly that fund grew. We now help elders facing financial abuse. We connect them with lawyers, help them regain access to their own accounts, help them understand they don't owe their whole life to anyone. I attended conference after conference, listening to stories, some so painful I had to pause just to breathe. Others so familiar it felt like holding someone's hand through the same darkness I'd walked. Every time I returned home, exhausted but light, I knew one thing. Nothing I endured had been wasted. Carlos, the attorney who helped me from day one, kept telling me I was stronger than I realized. I don't know if he's right. All I know is, when you've been pushed to the very edge of pain, you learn to rise using parts of yourself you once believed were broken. And Malik, we no longer speak. Not because I cut him off, but because he drifted away, quiet and stubborn. After the video went viral, he lost his job for a while, then found work in another state. Jamila changed jobs. They didn't announce a breakup or a reconciliation, but people told me they were just trying to stabilize. Malik texted me twice in those 2 years. The first time, to say he was moving so mom won't worry. I was washing dishes when I saw that message. Mom, can you spot me something just to get by? I'll pay you back. I froze. Warm water ran over my hands, but inside me, something turned cold. Not cold with anger, cold with realization. He still didn't understand. He still thought the old cycle would continue, that if he softened his tone enough, I'd open my wallet again, erase myself again, patch the holes in his life again. I dried my hands, opened my phone, and typed one sentence. Son, you're an adult now. Start living like one. I don't know if he ever reread that message. He never replied. Some nights I lay awake, not because I miss the man he's become, but because I grieve the boy I once raised. The boy who smiled at my gumbo, who hugged me during sad movies, who whispered, I love you, Mama. I grieve for that child. The one buried under ambition and manipulation so deep that even I failed to see him slipping away. But I no longer blame myself. I did my part. I loved him with everything I had. I rescued him so many times that I nearly erased myself completely. And one day, I had to choose save him again or save myself. I chose myself. And when you're a mother, that is the hardest choice of all. 2 years after my life was torn open by wedding music and betrayal, I look back and feel something strange. I don't see myself as a victim anymore. I feel whole, not perfect, not wealthy, but whole. Every time I get a new letter from someone I've never met, every time an elder tells me, because of you, I said no to my child for the first time, my heart warms in a new way. A warmth born from freedom. I still live in that old house. Same creaky sofa, same faint oak smell drifting through the quiet afternoons. But the house no longer holds pain. It holds beginnings. I don't know what's coming next. I don't know if Malik will ever show up at my door and apologize. I don't know if I'm strong enough to hug him if he does. But I know one thing. I will never lose myself again. In these 2 years, I learned a lesson I spent my whole life not understanding. Loving yourself isn't selfish. It's the foundation you need to love others without sacrificing your own soul. 2 years have passed since the day everything blew up in my life, like a fistful of fireworks thrown right into the center of it. 2 years. It sounds long, but for me, it's just enough time for wounds I once believed would never close to finally knit themselves back together. Sometimes when I look back, I'm still surprised. How does a woman who once stood trembling, holding her cheek after being slapped at her own son's wedding, become someone who walks onto a big stage to speak about the dignity of older adults? How does a mother who once feared losing her child so much she could barely breathe become a woman calm enough to put an end to the emotional dependency that held her captive for half a lifetime? I still don't have a straight answer. Maybe because life isn't a straight line, it's a spiral that moves you to places you never expected to go. But there is one thing I know for sure. I learned how to rise from the exact place where I once fell. After the fund for older adults facing financial abuse became stable, I stepped into a new chapter, one filled with work. Yes, but also with a kind of aliveness I had never felt before. I met all kinds of people. Grandmothers tricked by daughters-in-law into signing over their homes, grandfathers whose grandkids opened credit cards in their names, mothers just like me, so much like me that every story they told pulled tight around my heart. I'm no superhero. I just sit with them, take their hand. No one has the right to treat your kindness like obligation. Age doesn't make you worth less. You have the right to keep what you built with your life. Every time an elder gets back access to their own bank account, I feel a small piece of myself heal too. Maybe that's why I keep going. Helping them is a way of helping myself. My house hasn't changed much in these 2 years. The pale yellow walls I painted when Malik was little still have the same soft shade. The oak kitchen table has a few new scratches souvenirs from the days I yanked a chair too hard while frustrated over paperwork. The sofa still makes that little clunk every time I lean back, so familiar it feels like the house greeting me. But the thing that changed the most is me. I don't wake up with heaviness in my chest anymore. I don't look in the mirror wondering, am I still good enough for my child to love? I stopped making excuses for the things Malik did. Some wounds don't heal by hiding them. They heal by looking straight at them until they lose their power. Malik. In the past 2 years, he contacted me once more. A short message. Jamila had the baby, no photo. No, how are you, Mom? Not even half a sentence of real openness. That message stopped me right in the middle of my living room. My hand tightened around the phone, and my heart dropped somewhere deep. I sat down, relaxed my shoulders. I didn't cry. What I felt was softer, something warm and aching and empty all at once. I texted back, "Congratulations. What's the baby's name?" An hour later, Malik replied, "Oliver." I read that name over and over, as if each letter held its own warmth. Oliver, a beautiful name, a name that made me think of sunlight through a morning window, of a tiny green sprout not yet knowing which direction life will ask it to grow. Malik didn't send anything else, and I didn't ask. I know that if I try to rebuild our connection too soon, I'll slip back into the old cycle, the one where I silence myself just to keep the peace. This time, I'm not doing that. I still haven't met Oliver. Not because I don't want to, but because Malik hasn't opened that door, and I respect that. Not because his choice deserves respect, but because I do. I will not beg for any relationship. Love isn't something you pull from someone with tears or suffering. Still, I opened a savings account in my name, labeled, "For Oliver when he's old enough to choose what's right for himself." I didn't do it for Malik. I did it for the child who has no blame in the mess grown-ups created. If one day Oliver knocks on my door, I want something to give him, not money, but a foundation. A quiet message that whatever his father did, the next generation doesn't have to carry that burden. One winter morning, while making coffee, I watched the first snow fall outside my window. The sky was gray, the air sharp but clear, and I thought about my life. The turning points, the collapses, the slow, steady rising. I thought about all the people I've met through my story, the thank you letters written in shaky blue ink, the warm hugs I never imagined I deserved. And I thought about Malik. I don't know if my son will ever come back, not to ask for money, but to ask for forgiveness. And I don't know whether I'll be strong enough to open my heart again if that day comes. But I do know this. I'm no longer afraid of that question. I rebuilt my life with my own trembling hands. I found my footing without leaning on anybody. And I learned to love myself without waiting for permission. Watching the snow melt along the edge of my window, I realized something. Peace isn't something you search for out there. It's something you build after walking through the deepest cracks in your own heart and choosing to keep going anyway. 2 years ago, I thought I lost everything. Today, I know I finally found myself. That night, after rereading Malik's last message, the one about the grandbaby I still hadn't met, the house was quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear the clock ticking one beat at a time. And I realized, sometimes silence isn't loneliness at all. Sometimes it's a reminder that you survived. I don't know if the future will bring Malik back to me or push us even farther apart. I don't know if Oliver will ever come looking for me someday. But for the first time in my life, I'm at peace with not knowing. I have loved, I have fallen apart, and I have stood back up, using whatever strength my heart still had left. I close my eyes, letting my shoulders fall. No more trembling from fear. Just a quiet kind of peace I built out of my own ruins. A peace no one can take away from me ever again. But then, suddenly, a thought moved cold through my chest. If a mother like me could be used, pushed to the edge, all in the name of family, then how many people out there are suffering the same way, quietly, with no one ever noticing? And that's what keeps me awake sometimes. So, if you've listened to this story and felt a small ache in your heart, leave me a comment. Tell me what it stirred in you, because sometimes is enough to remind someone that they are not alone in the pain they've been carrying. And if you want to walk with me through more real-life stories sharp like knives, burning like fire, and honest enough to make you look at your own reflection, hit that subscribe button so you won't miss whatever comes next.